Hello, everybody. Welcome to BeerSmith Podcast number 93. It's early December 2014, and Nathan Smith joins me this week to talk about hops. I'd like to thank this week's sponsor, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're now offering a full 6 issues a year, up from 4, for the same discount price. In addition, you can get another 20% off your subscription when you use the offer code BeerSmith at checkout. I encourage you to check out this great new magazine, which makes an amazing gift for the holidays, at beerandbrewing.com, and use the offer code BeerSmith to get your 20% discount today. Also, I want to mention the American Homebrewers Association 2014 gift card program. Give the gift of an AHA membership to a fellow brewer. They're running a special from now through December 31st where you can receive a free book or my extract video when you order a gift card. To find out more, go to homebrewersassociation.org/membership and click on the gift membership link. Again, that's homebrewersassociation.org/membership and click on the gift membership link. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, Nathan Smith joins me to talk about hops. Nathan is a nationally award-winning home brewer, frequent guest on the Brewing Network, and has been on the show several times before. The last time was way back in episode number 50 on Saisons. And he was also talking about sour beers before that in podcast number 17. Nathan, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back on. What number are we up to if the last one was 50?
This is 93 we're on now.
93. Nice. Getting close to that big 100.
Close to the big 100. I'm looking forward to that. So, Nathan, what have you been up to lately? It's been quite a while since I had you on, I guess.
Yeah, it's been almost double the amount of episodes. Yeah. So in homebrewing, I've put a big emphasis on brewing with and understanding new hop varieties. We'll get into some specifics in a minute, but I've used that research as a motivation to look at homebrewing with a specific goal and in a different way than I did in the past, which was trying to master the basics using competition feedback and that performance as a way to improve myself. I wanted to consolidate all this research around brewing with new hops and present it at the National Homebrewers Conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan last June. And I did that, and we will talk about some of that content today, but I also want to talk about what I've learned since then. And as you can see that whole talk as I gave at the NHC, documented by Chip at Chop and Brew, to tape the whole thing and put it on his website, as well as the slides are available on my website, destroy.net/brewing. You'll see that there if you want to look at it in high detail. But I think one of the coolest things I've done in homebrewing since we talked last was attending the ANHC, the Australian National Homebrewing Conference. Those folks were kind enough to invite me and some of the other folks from the Brewing Network to participate.
I bet that was a great experience, no?
Yeah, that was really, really amazing, and I can't thank those guys enough. That's one of the coolest things that I've done in homebrewing. I highly recommend homebrewers check out the Australian brewing and homebrewing scene. They have quite a cool thing going, and they're really in a growth period right now too. So people are very excited and lots of really fun stuff there.
Yeah, but I've been amazed. They've been the number 2 market for BeerSmith for I don't know how long, for years and years and years. Yeah, and
that says a lot. Yeah, it says a lot right there. Outside the United States, I think homebrewing as a hobby is the most popular in Australia, more than any other country, which is pretty cool. I mean, and aside from just that stuff in the Australian NHC, that would have been enough. I've also been lucky to do some extensions of these homebrewing ideas and on hops into the professional world with a few different collaborations over the last year with Heretic Brewing for their anniversary beer. Faction Brewing is kind of a connection with that Heretic project.
You've been working with Jamil on that?
Yeah, exactly. With Jamil on that, which is a lot of fun. He so kindly asked me to do a collaboration beer with him and Faction.
We're talking about Jamil Zainashev, of course.
Yeah, Jamil Zainashev. Yep, couple books, a little visibility.
Runs Heretic Brewing, right?
Yep, runs Heretic Brewing in Fairfield, not too far from where I am in Northern California. And that was a collaboration with Faction Brewing, which is a new brewery in Alameda, with Roger Davis and his wife, Claudia. They'd been on the Brewing Network show a couple of times, and it was fun to do that collaboration. As well as Drake's Brewing, another brewery in the East Bay that I really like a lot. They invited me to do the Pro-Am with them, which was a lot of fun. And we used some of the new hop varieties I'm going to talk about later in that Pro-Am collab, which was really cool to see things scale up just out of the garage and on the pro scale. And then most recently with Cellar Maker Brewing in San Francisco, a different New Zealand hop-focused beer and Marin Brewing in Marin itself to do a beer with the hop Belma, which I'll touch on a little bit later too. So I've been kind of blessed to do a lot of different home brewing / pro brewing collaboration projects since we've
Sounds
talked
like you've
last.
Been very busy. Have you done this full? Are you going full time now?
I don't know, man. I get encouragement to do that all the time.
Job, huh?
I do. I still have the day job, and that takes quite a bit of time. The time I dump into that has grown a little bit in the last couple of years too. So that keeps me a little bit from doing things that we're doing right now. And so I'm happy we finally found some time to set aside to do this.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Nathan on for a couple months now, at least.
Yeah. And we've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. I'm glad we finally found the time. Thanks for working with me to work that out.
Well, thanks again for being on the show. And I wanted to get back to the main topic, which was hop varieties. And you've got a number of new hop varieties you've been working with. Are they really just focused on IPAs, or have we got some really new stuff here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think there's a dizzying array of new hops that are available to both pro brewers and home brewers. And I'll emphasize the American hops and what we're going to talk about today. But in the last few years in the American hop market, from the American hop growers, we've had hops like Equinox, Azaka, Mosaic, Eldorado, Belma, and the list goes on. That's just the ones we know about that have names. In the past, new hops are often variations on classic American varieties. And in the 90s, we saw hops from American growers that were essentially like a super version of an older hop with more crop stability, like a super Cascade variation or a super Centennial variation. And then in the 2000s, we started seeing the emergence of the popularity of unique signature hops with hops like Amarillo and Simcoe. And that kind of set the stage for, I think, where we are now a little bit. And people kind of expect that new hops from American growers are going to be, a new Amarillo or a new Simcoe. And I think the growers in some ways kind of want that. But what we're finding is that as the growers are exploring the widest expression of genetic material available in hops, and they're looking for something new and unique that they want to patent. And they also want to bring us on the home brewing and pro brewing side something interesting and unique. And IPA brewing is an important part of that, but it's not the only part. I think many pro brewers really want to differentiate their IPAs from the guy down the street, maybe, and that's one reason why those guys are interested in looking at new hop varieties. But there's a lot more going on than just IPA.
So, what's the point of using some of the new hop varieties that you're seeing come out?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to think about it. I mean, we've all these classics that have been with us for a long time. I mean, even the classic noble hops and just maybe a couple American hops and one or two English hops, you can do almost every style that's in the BJCP guidelines. So why stray from those? And I think part of the reason why is that there's, as the growers explore all this genetic material that's available, we find that we're having some new cool stuff emerging from the new hop varieties that we're being presented with. Berry, melon, tropical, cedar, onion / garlic character, bubblegum, cocoa, coconut, vanilla. I mean, these are all new characteristics that have been applied to some of the new hop varieties. And along with those, you get this intangible complexity that you get a hint of those, and then maybe some of the classic spicy and citrus character or earthy character you might get from the old school hop varieties. And you get this is new, unique signature idea starting to happen. You think about it and taking a step back, hops are one of the most powerful ingredients in brewing to create a signature character and complexity. And we're getting more character, more complexity from hops than ever before. By using new hop varieties, you can help look beyond what maybe everyone else is doing or what you had done in the past and create your own story or to do something different.
Are all these new hops high alpha varieties, or are they starting to come out with lower ones now?
There's a moderate alpha characteristic that you start to see along the lines of many of these new hop varieties, a pocket of about 9 alpha to 12% alpha. And I don't know if that was done by design or choice. I think that just tends to be where the characteristics that the growers are looking for tend to shine the most. One of the growers that we'll mention here in a little bit, Hopsteiners, tended to lean towards very, very high alpha varieties. They used to grow almost exclusively, I think, for the extract market. So a lot of their breeding program, the skills that they have are kind of focused on that. But people growing specifically for kind of this new emerging craft beer market, it's not always super high alpha. And we'll talk about one in a little bit in detail, lemon drop, that's actually kind of even on the lower side too. So you see a range, although they tend to kind of be more than 10% alpha, and some of them as high as 20.
Yeah, I know they're driving some of that. Some of that's obviously commercial reasons they're driving that for hop extract and so on.
Yeah, exactly. For oils and extracts, that's obviously, pounds per acre are a big deal there, and alpha per acre as they talk about it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So Nathan, how do we get here? How do we end up with so many new hops coming on the market all at once?
Yeah, I think one way that helps understanding the context of this is that, hop breeding has shifted from mimicking these continental European noble varieties, and the breeding in the U.S. in particular is what I'm talking about, because based on the growth of the U.S. craft brewing market, and homebrewing is certainly part of that, there is a market for these new, previously weird charactered hops that the breeders can come up with. The breeders can now focus on all that unique character and bring new flavors and aromas to the market and develop their own patents along the way, which a lot of them want to do. Simcoe was called YCR 14 when it was first developed, before it had a name, and that's a great example of how we kind of set a precedent for this. Simcoe was originally selected by the breeders and growers in the mid 90s. They expanded acreage in the late 90s, but it was really an experiment and one of the first forays into unique, strong, distinct craft aroma type hop, as Jason Peralt put it. He was part of that breeding program. And it's a high alpha hop, but they considered it an aroma hop, and they selected based on that. And it really helped pave the way for similar varieties they could sell, specifically as character varieties for the craft beer market. By 2011, that hop was a huge success, but in 2001, it was almost a complete failure. In 2002, 2003, someone started buying that hop in quantity, and as the story goes, that was Vinny at Russian River, and he started creating a hugely popular beer around that, Pliny the Elder. And that it's kind of his interesting story of how the hop was almost discarded completely because there was no uptake, but it has come to become one of the most popular hops for American craft brewing for hoppy beers. And then Citra came along a few years later and kind of reinforced that. Citra was this old genetic material that was originally crossbred in the early 90s. When it was rediscovered and re-released in 2008 and 2009, it was an overnight success. There was simply no market back for it when it was first developed, but now there certainly is. So the growers have recognized this, and everyone wants to get in on that game and offer something new and interesting for the craft beer market, because then they can really start to make some money off the patent and to do something new and interesting too. So it's mutually beneficial.
So what does it take to actually commercially develop a new hop?
The breeding itself takes apparently 6 to 10 years. It used to be at least 10 or more, but now they can compress that into about 6 to 7 in the best case scenario. There are 8 major considerations that the breeders and growers put into developing a new hop variety, not just alpha acid, but also beta aroma characteristics, cohumulone, and then some very real important characteristics on the growing side, like pest resistance and storage, yield and trellis height. There's a program that grows dwarf hops only, the ADAHA program, for example, when we talk about trellis height. And there's 6 stages of the breeding process, but the brewers are really only interested, and we're only interested as brewers and homebrewers, on the last 2 stages they call the elite trials and commercialization. That's when the hops start to become a little bit available for experimentation in the brew house.
So in commercial quantities, right?
Yeah, exactly. In commercial quantities. Equinox is one just within the last year that started to be grown in commercial quantities, for example. But the success rate is very low. It's basically about 1 in 40,000. So those first few years of the breeding process, they'll just start cleaving off hops that didn't work out. And many don't make it to market. And it's very time consuming and very expensive, and it takes a long time. And as we take that Citra example, as that hop became very successful in 2009 or so, we're not even seeing the full benefit of the hype around that hop really hitting the rest of the hop market. And we'll start to see even more as hoppy beer continues to be popular, and I think it will. We'll see even more hops hitting the market by 2-3 years from now, probably.
I've noticed a lot of them have started patenting their hops too, whereas a lot of the earlier hops were not patented. Why? What's the move towards patenting?
Right. A lot of public money used to be spent on hops, and apparently some more is being spent again. basically because there's probably more profit margin there now than there was before. But speculation aside, there's a USDA funded hop program in Washington, and that's still a public program that does create hops for the general use without patents, as I understand it. And they've actually started to come to market with a few in the last year. Tahoma, Cashmere, Yakima Gold, Triple Pearl, and Multi-Head are hops that have come through that program. Apparently, we have a little less familiarity with those, and they're a little less common to us homebrewers. But I encourage people to check them out because, we'll be seeing quite a few of those from different growers, and not just from the patented growers that are growing hops that come from these proprietary programs. Because the breeding is so expensive, I think that has really pushed a lot of the research into the private sector. And the folks who are growing specifically for the private craft sector want an Amarilla or a Citra or a Simcoe, so to speak. I think they want a hop that has a lot of interest on the brewing side, but is also very lucrative to own a patent on.
So who's bringing us all these new hops?
Yeah, in the American craft brew and homebrew market, there's 5 different ones that I've identified. There's probably even more, though. Let's start with these, though. The HBC, the Hop Breeding Company, or Select Botanicals. They're kind of a merged group of folks in the Yakima region, as I understand it. And those are the folks that bring us hops like Simcoe, Mosaic, and Equinox. They're kind of a powerhouse for the original big signature craft brewing kind of things that we think about as IPA signature hops. Hopsteiner brought us hops like Apollo, and also many new numbered varieties with a lot of interest around them. They've traditionally grown very high alpha hops for the extract market, but now they seem to be very interested in getting into the craft brewing and home brewing market. 05256, 01210, which is now Lemon Drop, and 06300 are some from that program, which have been of high interest in the last few years. The ADHA, the Dwarf Hop Association, brought us Summit more than 10 years ago, and that's a really interesting, cool, high alpha hop. It has that garlic and onion character.
What's a dwarf hop? What does that mean?
Dwarf trellis. So it grows at a smaller trellis than typical like 19, 20-foot trellis or more. The dwarf trellis can be harvested easier since the trellis isn't as high. And the costs are lower on the harvesting side. And I think that's the main motivation. There's probably other reasons, but I think that's the primary motivation. Yeah, and Summit is one that's really popular and well known from that program. Some people love to hate it too because it has this. Sometimes Summit has this onion garlic character, which is a love or hate thing. But in addition to Summit,
goes good with pizza, right?
Yeah, I always kind of like that hop for its kind of aggressive character, but some people find that kind of offensive. It is kind of a sulfurous quality as well, that garlic onion character. So that can be not everyone's cup of tea. But Azaka and Yarhilo are 2 new ones from that program, which are pretty interesting. And I think both of those, and especially Azaka, in my experience, has been one that is a good example of this hop that might not be best suited for an IPA. I thought dark beer, maybe some different styles would do even better with that hop. But interesting things coming from the dwarf hop folks. And then the last 2, the USDA program, which I had mentioned previously, that in the past had brought us Newport and Santiam, has now brought us new hops like Cashmere. And then the last one, I guess, worth mentioning, the 5th one is individual farms are getting in on this game too. Peterbog Farm, which brought us this hop Belma to the home brewing, craft brewing market recently, I think is a kind of a cool example of that. They've always sold hops to the homebrew market through Hops Direct, and therefore have a lot of visibility in the homebrewing world. And that Belma is very cheap too, so that's a fun one to experiment with. They've been selling it at less than $10 a pound, and probably around range of 4 or 5 in the last couple of years. Yeah, it's really reasonable, and that one makes it easier to kind of experiment in an economic way for people who want to play around too. So that's another thing to think about in terms of some of these new hops as well. As Citra, for example, becomes more hard to find, a lot of times on the homebrew level, it's very expensive. Some of these new hop varieties, because they don't have the hype yet, are a little bit cheaper. So that can be another motivating factor for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the characteristics of the new hops?
Right. Like you were mentioning earlier, the alpha range. Yeah, I think that's a good question. And the typical attributes for these new American character hops, 9 to 12% alpha, 24 to 32% cohumulone, higher oil content is the interest in dry hopping in particular, and not just for IPAs, but there's
late
kind of
hops or dry hops.
Exactly, 2 to 3% oil content or more. Equinox is a good example of that, a newer hop that has 3% or more, which is very high along the ranges of where Citra is. And I think in addition to those kind of metric stats, a unique sensory focus, this idea around a tropical berry or a melon characteristic from American hops. Citra kind of being that one that set the stage for the tropical example. But berry and melon are kind of two other characteristics that the growers and breeders are looking for. And not just classic citrus, not just a variation on Cascade.
Well, with so many hops entering the market right now, how can a home brewer go about evaluating the different hops?
Yeah, I mean, you typically will go to maybe your local homebrew shop or the online store, and you'll find 3, 4 or more new hops. How could you ever possibly try and evaluate all these if you wanted to? And we start thinking, is it simply enough to smell the hops? And that's certainly a very good thing. And you can take the hops and, volatilize them in your hand, do rub tests kind of like this, like the growers would, and the people when they go for hop selection. I think that's a good method to get at least a basic sensory impression. Some people like doing a hop tea. I've never found that to be all that indicative of what the beer would be like what a hop would be like in a finished beer. It's not necessarily a bad technique, but I remember at one point in one of his talks, Vinny at Russian River had mentioned you actually have to brew with them to figure them out. And I completely agree, I think, because there's not just what is the hop doing when it's dissolved in solution, but we know and understand that certain hop oils are not always reduced by fermentation, but can be transformed and increased or at least changed during fermentation. So you need the effects of fermentation to really understand and get a good impression of a new hop. You actually have to brew with them. I think on the home brewing level, though, you can make some educated guesses and use your time wisely. I mean, as home brewers, we're not pro brewers, so we're not making 30 barrels of wort, every day or every other day.
Well, not all of us.
Not all, yeah. Some folks have a chance to brew a lot more than others.
Serious homebrew setup. So
yeah, some people go crazy, which is pretty awesome. And that, those guys could probably brew with a new hop every day. But if you're only brewing on the weekend and you're making 10 gallons at a time, think of ways in which you could split that batch at every stage if you want to play around with different hops. And that might mean splitting the wort with 2 different hop backs that you would exchange during the cooling process. Now, if you do that, be very careful and be very safe. If you do that, there's ways you could hurt yourself if you're not careful. But I think that's a fun way to play around with different ideas there. Something even simpler than that, you could just do different dry hops with new hop varieties, or play around with how you add them as you collect your wort in the kettle. Don't be afraid to try 2 or more different hops as you kind of think about this batch splitting technique with different yeasts as well. There's many permutations you could take there, and I think you don't necessarily have to brew a single hop beer every time to learn quite a bit about these hops with a single batch.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the new hop varieties that you personally recommend?
Yeah, I really like the hop that was HBC 369, which is now Mosaic, an already pretty popular hop that many of us are familiar with. That's a pretty cool one. I think that is very familiar with and easy to work with in the brew house in terms of we can treat it like Amarillo or Simcoe or Citra, and it responds in a very similar way. Equinox, which was HBC 366, just released this year. Many similar things to say there. That really big oil content, so it's great for dry hopping. Lemon Drop, which was 01210 and 05256 from that same program. I think those are 2 really cool hops worth experimenting with. 05256 has a lot of characteristics that are almost Simcoe-like, as many people put it, and I don't think that's a wrong comparison. It's kind of one of the more characterful, unique late hop, dry hop hops from the Hopsteiner program. So that one's cool. Belma and Legacy from the Peterbog Farms folks. Belma is one I think that's a subtle, almost noble-like hop and responds really well in that kind of context, in the non-IPA hop context. Same thing with Azaka from the ADHA program. I really like that hop in a darker beer, for example. No, those are some really cool ones to start with, but there are so many more that, if I went and looked today at what the online homebrew retailers are selling, and I saw 2 or 3 more that I'd never heard of before. So there's always something cool new going on with with what's happening in hops right now. I think
there's
we
some neat
can
ones
expect
coming
that
out
to
of.
increase.
You mentioned Australia earlier, but there's some neat ones coming out of Australia and New Zealand as well.
Absolutely, yeah, very cool hops coming out of Australia and New Zealand, and that's one way in which we think about a hop like Mosaic, and I think that's very New Zealand-like in its character and based on the popularity of hops like Nelson. I think that's part of the reason why Mosaic has made an emergence here. Yeah, those classic New Zealand hops that have that really, really big tropical, cold-growing region character are really, really cool as well. Yeah, not only American breeders and growers are doing signature hops. We're even seeing signature hops that were crossbred with Cascade coming out of the German growers, which is unbelievable. If you would think 10 years ago or more, those guys would never have done that, I don't think.
Well, Nathan, can you provide us with a sample recipe using some of the new hops?
Yeah, it's speaking of some of those commercial collaborations I mentioned earlier. The one that I did with Marin Brewing and Hogg's Apothecary for their first anniversary was a Kolsch around Belma, and your listeners will know your BeerSmith cloud site, the recipe site, BeerSmith
Sure.
Recipes. Yeah, you can search for my name on there.
BeerSmithRecipes.com.
Yeah, exactly. There's a Belma Kolsch recipe that I have there.
So you search for, is your username Nathan Smith? I can't recall.
Username there is NAHTHAN. It's kind of a goofy palindrome twist on my first name, but if you look,
THAN.
Yeah, exactly. On BeerSmith
I'll put a link in the show notes just in case. But
cool, thank you. Yeah, there's a Belma Kolsch recipe which I really love. It's a great example of how a new hop variety is a nice, subtle, noble-like hop. It's not necessarily this expressive, dank IPA hop. Give that one a try. There's a recipe I call 6300 IPA, also on the cloud site as well. That is the prototype for what became the Drake's cryptographic IPA that we brewed for the Pro-Am this year. That features 05256 and Lemon Drop and Mosaic. Really nice way to play around with those three hops kind of in concert. I think those three hops can reinforce each other and do really cool stuff there. And then there's one that goes back to my beginnings of playing around with these new hops, Mosaic Monster IPA, which is a single hop Mosaic IPA, more or less. There's a couple of other varieties playing supporting role a little bit, but Mosaic's a great way for people to start playing around with new hops. I think if people are interested, and most homebrewers who are probably already have at this point. But yeah, those three recipes, at least to start with. If you go to that NHC link that I'd hinted at earlier for you folks that are interested in seeing even more, I presented a dozen recipes or more during that talk. And every single one of those recipes has a link to a BeerSmith recipe. And
you have a talk linked, I think, on your website as well, right? At Destroy.net.
On my website, yeah, destroy.net/brewing. Yeah. Right at the top there, brewing with new hop varieties. You'll see it. I fully admit my website skills are very old school, and it's basically a list of PDFs, but I think most homebrewers are just after the info. So you'll certainly find that there.
Yeah, that looks like a 1980s website. That's very...
It does, yeah, and that's my approach to technology. My approach to technology is very old school, so that reflects it. Yeah.
Well, what about some of the ones like Lemon Drop, Steiner, some of the other ones coming out?
Yeah, worth commenting a little bit more on those. We've hinted at that a little bit. These hops that are coming out of the Steiner program, I think, are pretty cool. Lemon Drop 01210, that way we use in that Drake's cryptographic I just mentioned, has this really cool citrus zest character. That's not unlike Centennial, and that's kind of some of the things we expect from that hop. But there's a new intangible complexity there that has like a fruity herbal quality that's different than Centennial. It came from the same breeding program as Calypso, as I understand it, but it's geared even more towards IPA and late hop. And it's an interesting one, as you mentioned earlier, all these new hops high alpha, and that one is an example of one that's not. It's as low as 5 to 7, which is kind of an old school Cascade range. And as we understand it, this hop was bred with Cascade and the USDA numbered variety. So that makes sense why the alpha might be a little bit lower. But it has higher oil content than maybe some of the lower alpha varieties, upwards of about 2%, which is kind of cool. So yeah, this idea of, classic citrus with like a fruit blossom or an herbal tea quality is what you'll get out of Lemon Drop. And I think that one is starting to make more of an appearance and worth playing around with. 05256, that doesn't have a name yet. That's one that I'd been playing with for a little while. And then Roger Davis at Faction, which I'd mentioned a little bit earlier, Faction really has taken off and done some really cool beers with 05256. I'd be very surprised if that one doesn't get a name and a proper kind of marketing positioning within the next couple of years. That's a cross between Apollo and Mercure. Apollo being this giant high alpha, almost 20% alpha hop, and 05256 can also get very high in alpha, but not too dissimilar than Apollo. Kind of in the same realm. Just big, in your face, kind of dank, citrus, pine, and a little bit of mint. A lot of oil content, very expressive. A little goes a long way. Really fun to try in an IPA. It will dominate other hops, though, if you try to blend it with something more subtle. So 05256 and maybe Belma, for example, you won't get much Belma, I think. 05256 would dominate it pretty quickly. So really fun hop, but really, really aggressive.
So two of the ones I've enjoyed, Mosaic and Equinox, have also made a pretty big impact in the home brewing scene.
Yeah, they really have. And we think about the HBC or the Select Botanicals and Hop Breeding Company program is kind of the premier program for American showcase craft brewing hops, and Mosaic and Equinox are certainly no exception. Mosaic is kind of this New Zealand almost hop in terms of its it's got this blueberry and tropical and citrus with slight pine. It's like appropriately named in that sense, I suppose, because it is truly a mosaic of many, many different qualities, and that it's a daughter of the Simcoe hop, so it kind of shares that same lineage, and sometimes you get some slight Simcoe qualities out of it, but I think it's fairly different. Yeah, it's a cross of Nugget and Simcoe, and it's one of these patented hops for sure, and one that's had really good uptake, and they've just released it a couple of years ago, but I think it's a really fun hop to do a single hop beer, an IPA that's focused on this hop. I had a really cool beer at the NHC in Grand Rapids, Michigan this year at Founders. It was called Mosaic Promise. And as you might imagine by the name, it was just Golden Promise malt and Mosaic hops. And that was a fantastic beer. Mosaic is fun to do and just let it kind of steal the show and enjoy kind of its unique qualities. I mean, you could blend it with yeast character and malt character too, but I think it really, wants to be this big signature hop on its own. You can overdo it with that hop though, I think, and it's easy to overdo it if you push it too far. And it kind of has some of the same risks as Nelson Sauvignon in that way. And those risks being kind of a diesel or kerosene quality if you push it a little bit too far. So you have to play a balancing act, but it does kind of want to steal the show. And it's good at that. Equinox, we're still learning about it since it was just released this year, and some people had it on a smaller trial basis years past, but exceptionally high oil content in like the 2 to 3 or 4 to 3 range. I mean, 4% or more is just gigantic. Mm-hmm. The folks at Sierra Nevada, Tom Nielsen in particular, apparently was a strong advocate for this hop, and I think they really like it. It has a very classic, familiar complexity, but it's got this intangible something new to it as well. I get a fresh citrus or fresh orange juice or grapefruit zest kind of quality out of it with just a touch of blackberry or strawberry, maybe just a touch of melon, but big complexity. It fits well into the HPC portfolio, but it's not as crazy complex as a hop like Mosaic. It's a little more traditional, I think, but with all that oil content, it's just so well suited for late hopping and dry hopping. I think we'll see a lot more commercial beers around this hop if you haven't seen one already. If you stop by your local brew pub or your homebrew shop, you'll probably see this hop featured soon, if not already. It's one that's going to be a big deal and is starting to emerge right now. Yeah.
So one of the challenges is, especially some of these more popular new hops are getting hard to find. Do you have any advice on where you can find some of these new hops?
Yeah, it's kind of become like on the pro brewing side, people have to strategize years in advance a lot of times to get these hops, and they're obviously brewing in quantity and volume every day, and they need contracts to get enough of hops like Citra or Amarillo or Simcoe.
We tend to be at the end of the supply chain, the tail end.
Yes, exactly. You're very spot on there, Brad. We're at the end of that supply chain, or at weird points in that supply chain we can't always predict. And homebrewers have had to strategize a little bit. I mean, we're not contracting hops, of course, but you'll get to learn which local homebrew shops are kind of in on that game, or which the online guys tend to push that a little bit more, and you kind of got to look around at what's available and maybe buy a few months in advance. Or actually, we're taping this show in early December of 2014, and the November-December timeframe of every year is a good time for homebrewers to look around for hops because the new crop is just starting to become available.
Yeah,
and you might be able
harvested and dried out, right?
Exactly. It just got harvested and dried out, and the pelletizing is just starting to, those are just starting to become available. So, get on it. If it's November and December and you see Citra and there's a pound of it there in pellets and it's the new crop and it's good and you like that hop, you're probably going to need to buy it. It's one you might not be able to find next June. And that's just a reality of getting hops even on the homebrewing scale now. The growers are just trying to keep up with demand. There's so much interest in brewing big hoppy beers. And people want to brew big production beers with these signature hops. So growth by leaps and bounds, and that's been pretty cool for the craft beer world. But
it takes a couple of years to even step up production, right? It takes a couple of years to plant a new hop field and have it reach full production, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I ran into some folks from Hop Union at the NHC last year, and I was asking them about Equinox. And this individual told me that Equinox had just this year been planted enough in quantity, but those plants are still kind of considered babies and really wouldn't be at full production for a year or two.
It's production the first year typically.
No, they don't. Apparently high alpha hops like CTZ or Apollo are a little bit better in that sense of being more productive the first year. But even those, I think 2-3 years down the road, you reach max production. So
we had that problem actually. I think it was around 2010. There was a big hop shortage because I don't remember that.
I do, yeah.
And what happened is over the years they'd stored a whole bunch of hop oils, and because there was a glut in hop oil, the growers cut back on production, and then inevitably it caught up.
Exactly,
and there was a giant shortage.
Right, it's not like they can turn the spigot and control the supply side. They have to control the supply side on a much slower time horizon. So they're responding to something and they're maybe already behind the curve.
So for a while there, we were seeing hops at $5 an ounce or even more in some cases.
Exactly.
Crazy.
And a lot of folks suspect a lot of manipulation in that world, and they might not be wrong. And it's kind of hard to say for sure. But I really think the growers, after many years of having kind of a money losing business in many ways and not really having a good market for hops and not really making a lot per pound in the 80s and 90s, the dynamics have now changed, and they can make decent money on some of these newer hops that have a lot of interest. And that's probably for the best of the craft brewing industry, since they're so reliant on hops kind of driving the IPA market. But the growers and the supply side have a slower response time than maybe other industries in terms of supply and demand, for sure. Yeah.
They can't just make more widgets, I guess.
No, yeah, they can't just decide to make more widgets one day. They have to, they have to rip hops out, put them back in, wait 2-3 years. Yeah, they can't just write more lines of code or decide to develop a new feature for the customer. Yeah, it's a different kind of game. I have respect for the hop growers who kind of grow for the craft brewing market. I think they went through some times where they were taking big risks to get where they are, and now we're reaping the benefits of that, and it's pretty exciting. We'll see even more, I think.
Because the big growers have large contracts that go out 5 years or more. So that's
that's exactly.
Key points.
Exactly.
But the craft brewers don't do that. So, or at least most of them don't.
Most of them don't. But yeah, you raise a good point. As we have kind of the bigger craft players like Lagunitas or Sierra Nevada or Stone or Firestone Walker, and the list goes on. I think they're having to look at their supplies in a different way, so that they might start to act more like the bigger guys used to be in terms of their supplies, not necessarily the other things that we have not always a positive impression of, but in terms of getting more hops, I think they're getting closer to the growers, and that's probably a good thing.
So Nathan, can you provide some practical advice for somebody looking to dive into these new hops, where they may not have a new recipe or something to draw from, and really maybe starting with a blank sheet of paper?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about these new hop varieties, not just in the context of American Pale Ale or IPA. You can take these new American hop varieties and maybe start out with a Saison from the very beginning, or start out with a Helles or a Kolsch, and learn something new and cool, because these new hops, in many ways, a lot of them are very subtle, and they're bringing something to the table that's not as dank and aggressive as some of the things that we might be expecting of typical American new school hops. And so play around with that and realize that hops are still this really powerful ingredient to create signature complexity. And you can do that signature complexity in small amounts and in a style that isn't necessarily a hop showcase style. There are more new and unique hops than ever before, and look beyond what you've done before and what everyone else is doing and create your own story. Develop your own recipes based on the perceptions of these new hops. And by saying develop recipe, you can even take maybe your tried and true Saison recipe and say, wow, I read about lemon drop, and I really like my Saisons to have a big lemon type character. Maybe I'll just plug in lemon drop instead of the existing hop that you'd been using, and kind of start there. And think about ways you can brew into the hop's own strength and not against it. Do an evaluation test on the hops, or maybe try a single hop beer from other local brewer if you see that hop around, and think about what would reinforce that hop and not just try and send it after an Amarillo or a Citra type recipe. So, and if the hop isn't working with the style you're focusing on, you can always try another to figure it out. I think a lot of these newer hops are going to take some time before we figure out where they're really going to shine. And there's a lot of cool room to explore there.
Well, Nathan, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's about it. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that folks who like to talk about things like this and chatting about homebrewing in general on Twitter, follow me along there at Nathan Homebrew. A lot of folks like to chat about new hop varieties there, but that's not the only thing the Twitter account is for. And I encourage you to get in touch.
So again, that's @ Nathan Homebrew, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. It's been a blast. I'll do it again.
So thanks again to Nathan Smith for joining me. He's a nationally award-winning brewer, and you can find him featured on the Brewing Network and on Twitter. Well, a big thank you to Nathan Smith for joining us today. A holiday reminder, you can find copies of BeerSmith on CD, as well as my new DVDs featuring John Palmer in many local homebrew stores, as well as on Amazon Prime if you want a stocking stuffer for your favorite brewer. You can get more info at beersmith.com or beersmith.com/DVD. Thanks also to our sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, now offering 6 issues a year at a 20% discount. Head over to beerandbrewing.com and use the coupon code BeerSmith when you check out to get your 20% discount on this great new brewing magazine. And also the American Homebrewers Association. This group does an amazing job for the entire brewing community. I encourage you to join today or give a gift membership by going to homebrewersassociation.org/membership today. If you click on the gift membership link, you can give a membership to a fellow brewer and get a free book or my extract DVD as a gift for yourself. Give the gift of an AHA membership this season. Finally, thank you for your continued support of BeerSmith, and happy holidays to you and your family as we enter the 2014 holiday season. I hope you have a great brewing week.